if you've been thinking about Filecoin in terms of Web 3, you'll probably be wondering what happened to Web 1 and Web 2. I like to think, and I think it's true of everybody at the Filecoin Foundation and the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web and non-profit area, that we don't actually see the number as being important. What's important are the core values of the web. The version numbers at the end are kind of like the things that indicate where we are. And sometimes they sort of indicate like, oh, we have a slightly not so good version happening right now. There were a couple of like buggy patches. We're probably up to like Web 2.65, and there've been attempts to like overlay problems that have been developing in that whole area. So, but it's all the same thing. It's all about the web. It's all about preserving knowledge. It's all about building open culture and open systems so everybody in the world can share and create together. There are some challenges to that, and as you know, there have been some issues with the current version number that we've been dealt with, but some of the people working hardest in the world right now to make sure that the next patch is really going to fix things for everyone here with me today. I'm going to be delighted to moderate a discussion of that with Chris Lewis from Public Knowledge, Anna Tumadoto from Creative Commons, and the Filecoin Foundation and Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web, President and Chair, Marta Belcher. So, come on. Oh. Good. I should have like, sat down and
No.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, hello.
Hi. Well, let's leap straight into it. So the title of this is PSA, We're Building a Better Internet. Marta, I should probably explain for people outside the United States that PSA stands for Public Service Announcement, right? So what is the public service announcement here? What are you thinking about when you're trying to build a better internet?
Sure, for me?
Yeah.
Great. So, I think the thing about today's internet is fundamentally we are living so much of our lives every day through just a handful of corporations. And we really have no choice but to trust those corporations with our data. So we have to trust them with deeply personal information about where we are, who we're talking to, who we're paying, what we're saying, right? This is deeply, deeply personal and important information. We also have to trust them to keep it safe from hackers, to keep it safe when you have requests from governments to actually protect our civil liberties. And so we're really envisioning a better version of the web where you don't have such centralized power where all of our data is really controlled by just a few major players. So this is really what we mean when we talk about building the next generation of the web. It's building an internet that we've created an alternative to big tech where we can really protect the autonomy of users, protect their privacy, and protect their security. So that's really fundamentally, I think, what's at the heart of what we think of when we talk about building a better web.
And people have been building a better vision and a better reality for the internet for decades now. And two of the organizations, if you don't mind me saying so, two of the organizations kind of leading the fight either to protect what we have or expand the abilities and the choices that we have are Creative Commons and Public Knowledge. So those of you who know Creative Commons will know that it's the fundamental liberal copyright organization that created the Creative Commons licenses that enable people to share and remix content. Public Knowledge is an amazing organization that sometimes doesn't get the coverage I think that it deserves. If you've ever heard of the term net neutrality and the battle for that, then you've probably been reading an article that's talking about the amazing work that PK have done to preserve and promote that both in the United States and the world. But right now, we're actually super excited because like two giant forces joining together, you've both got kind of an announcement to make right here on stage. Please tell me I'm not wrong.
No, you're right.
Okay.
You're right. Anna, do you mind? Or?
Go for it.
Well, so we're really excited that Public Knowledge has been able to partner with Creative Commons and a bunch of other organizations, groups like the Wikimedia Foundation, the Internet Archive, Derechos Digitales, and more to promote what we think is a growing movement to build a better internet. And Creative Commons has worked with us with the support of the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web to build a hub that we hope will grow over time to promote and connect that movement. The work that you guys are doing to build a better internet through technology, the work that folks like us are doing to try to build it through smart policies, and even folks on the ground who are supporting building a better movement, better internet movement through building a culture of norms around the internet that promotes openness and privacy and equity online. So that online hub is now open, Danny? Yeah.
Excellent.
That's the announcement. Last week it is open, the 1.0 version. We'll probably have a 2.0 version in a few months, but you can go on movementforabetterinternet.org and check out the calendar that is being populated with events of the movement around the globe. Anna, what did I leave out?
Woo. A round of applause, perhaps.
They're clapping for you.
No, we're extremely excited to be doing this work, and the more we talk to folks about this, the more this work is already happening. This movement emerged organically, and we just saw this opportunity to make sure that this didn't fizzle like so many other movements do, and rather give it some legs and pull together everybody who's already working on projects that share these same values and are fighting for these same principles. And so I would say anybody who would be interested in joining the movement and working more closely with us, definitely look at the hub or chat to us afterwards. Chris is pretty hard to miss, so find us later.
So we were wearing my Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web hat on. I mean, we were one of those groups in those very early discussions. And I think what kicked it off, and to be clear, all around the world, there are digital rights groups from EFF, EDRI in Europe. Every continent has organizations that you can check out and find. And a lot of them came out of the SOPA movement. Right? There was this big movement to censor and control the internet through the domain name system, which is probably one of the more centralized parts of the existing internet infrastructure. At that time, when we were fighting over SOPA, I really felt that in some ways, even though we were battling against a lot of strong opponents to an open web, it felt a bit like an uphill battle, right? Because there was an extremely positive understanding of the internet. I mean, I think these days it's harder to talk to politicians in a positive way about the internet and about the web. So, I mean, this is for both Anna and Chris. How do you talk to lawmakers when they're already thinking about the internet as being primarily Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon? They don't like how they're able to control their speech. They don't like how these things have developed into monopolies, particularly in Europe. And that's what they think about when they think about the internet.
Well, I think that's exactly the challenge, and one of the things that we have to do in these conversations, whether it's with the public or with policymakers, is just try to flip the narrative. Say, yes, we understand it's broken. We agree that there are problems, but instead of sitting here chipping away and putting duct tape and glue and Band-Aids on these problems, let's talk about what an affirmative vision could look like for this. And it may look different in different regions. It'll look different for different groups. We recognize that talking about a better internet, that better is a fairly subjective concept, and as you'll see on the website, the branding comes with an asterisk because better means different things to different people. And when we're thinking about that, for some people it may be a more private internet, for others it may be a more open internet, for others it may just be a more accessible internet. For a lot of people it's a question of actually being plugged into the proverbial wall because they can't get online at all. And so it spans all these different areas. But for every one of these challenges, we think that there's an opportunity. And so when we're talking to policymakers or staging interventions, shall we say, in proposed legislation, talking about here's what we would like to see. Here's how we can make sharing better. Here's how we can make access to knowledge better. Here's how we can make the digital experience better.
So Marta, so we're kind of here with the OGs of fighting for internet rights. But Marta, I know that you spend a lot of time in DC sort of trying to educate the current lawmakers about Web3 and this developing environment. What are the challenges you find talking to lawmakers there, and how do you bring it back to these shared values?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think that there's this real sense in DC that big tech is a problem, right? DC gets that, and I think, unfortunately, the knee-jerk reaction there, as with all things, when you're, a hammer in search of a nail, you sort of want to solve that with heavy regulation, right? And so what I try to do in DC and when talking to policymakers is instead sort of pitch our vision for building the next generation of the web, building a decentralized web where the availability of information isn't dependent on one server or company, where you give users more control and autonomy, and where you don't have the same single points of failure. And I try to pitch that as something that's actually being built, right, by the people in this room. And really my message there is to make sure that, when they are making regulations, when they're writing legislation, they're not undermining the innovation that could actually lead to us building technological solutions and building alternatives to big tech, and that doesn't get undermined by an attempt to overregulate.
So in previous sort of eras in DC and the capitals of around the world of sort of promoting the internet, I mean, one of the things that sort of struck me was because, frankly, at that stage at least, most lawmakers didn't know and didn't care to know about the technology behind these things, or this frankly unpopular or not well-known network. And what that meant was you kind of had to build together a coalition of people, staffers, lawmakers, political thinkers, who could build up a sort of constituency of people that you could talk to. And simply because of the numbers and because of the strange way that they'd often come to find out about these things, they actually crossed the whole political spectrum, right? You would have folks in the US, you would have Democrats and Republicans, and some of them would pick out and decide that they were going to be the internet lawmaker, and it wasn't really connected directly to their politics. Do you think that kind of cross-partisan work can still happen, at least in DC, Chris?
I think it can, but it has to be done early, and I think that's what's the great opportunity with the decentralized web, is that we're in a moment here where the issue has not become partisan or divisive.
Right.
And so when we talk about what are the values that are important to you, what are the values that are important to internet users, policymakers will learn over time that, okay, there are certain things that their constituents or other technology users really care about. And so as they ask, and I think ask important, tough questions about innovation, they can balance any concerns they may have with, okay, but what are the things that people love? What are the things that people want to get out of the technology? And so those values that we express, that we want your help in developing and putting forward on the movement for a better internet, they can be positive and proactive, and sometimes they can be protective and defensive, but they need to balance each other out. But the earlier the engagement, it's easy for a lot of us to stay in our bubble with our friends who talk about technology, but when you get it out in front of the policymakers and they learn about it early, they have a greater affinity for protecting it in the future. So we try to encourage that. We try to connect them to the technology and make sure that they learn about it as early as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
So Anna, Creative Commons is not really at heart a political organization or anything like this. You're really about the protecting and empowering artists and creators. Do you think that your own constituency knows enough about what's happening right now? Are they people who are politically involved as artists and creators? And in particular, with this new generation of sort of NFT using Web3 artists, are they aware of the laws that can affect them?
I think that the matter of access to knowledge or access to creativity is inherently political. And so even though we might historically have been seen as sort of like a fairly neutral organization and a safeguard of the CC licenses, the fact that we are fighting to ensure that people have access to the knowledge that they need when they need it, that people have the ability to share and reuse and remix under terms that suit them, I don't think that makes us entirely neutral, in fact, even though it may seem that way, maybe because we're in this happy open web bubble. We're all like, yes, this is exactly how it should be. But there are those who might disagree. But when it comes to decentralized technologies and the sort of, shall we say, older guard of open access communities, there's definitely some bridging that needs to happen there. And we think that there's actually very strong values alignment. Like when Creative Commons first launched, there was never a registry, there was never a ledger, you never had to tell anybody that you were CC licensing your work. It's just like you, as the creator or the researcher or the scientist, you can take this thing that you made. You probably recognize that it was built on the work of others, because we are all just building on the work of others. And you're going to put it out there in the world, and you can just do that by simply marking it that this is available for reuse. You don't have to tell anybody else. And ideally, you'll do it in such a way that somebody can find it. I think one of the bigger challenges that we've seen with the growth of Web 2, with walled gardens and silos, is it is very hard to find those things between different communities. And I think one of the areas that we care deeply about now, sort of on the political front, is ensuring that interoperability is front and center, that when these new technologies are developed, that they're compatible with one another, and that discovery is enhanced and not lost, because I would say that would be sort of the lost decade of Web 2 in terms of open access to content, is something that went from being potentially a very sort of like front and center mainstream thing during Web 1. There is a generation there that thinks that sharing is the same thing as a photo on Instagram, and it really isn't. Like, when you are sharing with intent and sharing for better purposes, it is because you want others to reuse or remix or grow humanity's knowledge and creativity. Web 2 has not allowed for that.
So Marta, and we talked a little bit about this in the policy discussion we had yesterday. I think that, again, looking at the experiences of PK, EFF, where I used to work, and Creative Commons, often a technical community or an online community really gets taken by surprise by regulation. Some ridiculous law will be proposed, and you go from, I can't believe they wrote this, to I can't believe they passed this so quickly. Do you see any particular threats or opportunities in the legal space that that look like they may be sort of aiming at Facebook and Google, but they'll end up sideswiping the emerging decentralized web instead? Yeah,
I think that the thing that is really interesting, and it's not just DC, right? It's international,
right?
And you definitely see a lot of, for example, you'll see a lot of. I was just talking last week about the Data Act in Europe as one example, where you see really well-intentioned legislation that is actually really aligned with the values of the decentralized web, and really is intending to protect people's privacy and data, where there's just like a lot of good stuff, but where, because they haven't really thought about what decentralized technologies actually do and how decentralized technologies actually work, they end up actually being something that will undermine the very technology that can actually technologically accomplish what the bill is trying to accomplish. So I spend a lot of time trying to explain that to lawmakers and regulators, so that when they're writing these bills, bills, they actually think about, okay, how do we make sure that we're not throwing out decentralized technologies? We're not rendering decentralized technologies non-compliant by virtue of the fact that we just didn't think about them when we were writing these bills. And this actually comes up all the time with things like, just to give you an example from my specific world where we're building a, cryptocurrency powered decentralized storage network, you'll have a lot of examples where legislators will write into a bill that data must be able to be deleted, right? Which is sort of at odds with the very fundamental idea of a blockchain. Or just like last week I was talking about the Data Act in Europe and the fact that it would require smart contracts to have kill switches, right? So things that are really fundamentally at odds, but that I think if you actually get down to it, we're really trying to accomplish the same goal as what the legislation is trying to accomplish.
Well, talking of accomplishing the same goal, I mean, whenever we have like an activist discussion like this, I mean, you're three amazing people heading three amazing organizations, but I know that you appreciate help. And also that I know that there are lots of people who really worry about these things and want to help out, but aren't entirely sure what they can do. So maybe if I can turn to you each of the turn as a final question, what would you recommend to somebody who's listening to this and is sitting like, I would like to help build a better internet?
Right. Well, other than following public knowledge at our own links, really we want folks to connect to the movement.
Right.
And so that's why we've built this hub at movementforabetterinternet.org. You can follow on Twitter at ForABetterNet, but we'll be continuing to grow from there. So we hope folks will sign up for that movement on that website, and we hope we can connect with you and hear what you think you can contribute to help us build a better net.
Yeah, and I would say really the thing to remember, because we're all very, very busy in our daily lives, is that the idea behind this movement and joining together is not to add new work to what you're already doing. It's to bring to the forefront the work that you're doing.
Right.
And I mean, and it's the same for us, for Creative Commons, for Public Knowledge, for the other organizations that have joined us. There should be like a 1% edition, and it's the connecting fabric between the work we're doing. So the help really is in more people using similar language, communicating similar ideas in similar ways, where we know we're aligned. Because I think we're probably all doing more of the same than of the different, and we may just not realize it.
Marta, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I think that this is a space where, I mean, really, you guys have done such an amazing job of bringing together so many different organizations. And I think one of the big things that we're looking to do specifically with Filecoin Foundation and Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web is also attract more funders to the space and get more people more funders interested in these particular issues to really fund the organizations that are doing such phenomenal work in the space. So you've brought them together, and I hope we can help to make sure that all that amazing work is getting funded.
Oh,
Thank you.
If you're out there and you'd like to know more about how the movement for a better internet is going, you've heard the URLs. You can also ping any of us. We're all going to be around for the rest of Phil Lisbon and into the Web Summit, which is where Web 2 comes into the picture. And I'd just like to thank our panelists for such great participation. Thank you.
Danny.
And all you do.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.